Well, let's go ahead, and the way we typically do this, I've got the cards that those of you who were in our 3:30 discussion about the book and filled out, we've got those questions. What we also do is, if you have a question for us, we'll have people form up in a line at the microphone here going back, and then what we'll do is we'll kind of, we'll answer a question from the cards, and then we'll take a question from that one of you have. So basically we spend this whole panel answering your questions. So you can answer anything and everything about My Little Pony. If you want to ask the question about the meaning of life, that's okay too. Ponies, 54, you know. So I hope some people have questions. So anybody who has questions, come on up to the microphone and form a line.
And I will start with one from the cards that were filled out. If my dad discovers I'm a brony, how do I introduce the fandom to him? Okay. Assuming your dad is not that open-minded, I would take him to the Brony Study website and the results, and introduce him to who's doing this study and the results of it, and then I would ask him to watch an episode with me, because I think that when people see, as we talked about earlier this afternoon, when people see an episode in the exposure study, they weren't as negative toward it as they were before. They see that, it's cute little ponies, but it's also ponies with a message. So that would be my approach.
And of course, you have to take into account the person.
Yeah.
Prepare yourself. Maybe have other people around or something. Okay, let's go to our first question at the microphone.
Hi, I was at your 3:30 session and I saw that you defined the fandom as 16 to 24, and I was just wondering how you arrived at 16 as the lower age bracket.
Well, the fandom goes much lower than that. We actually get
10 and 12-year-olds.
Yeah, we get 10 and 12-year-olds. I guess if you sort of look at a normal curve and say where's the largest chunk of the fandom, that's why I said 16 to 24. Generally, once you get in fact, sometimes I'll say 16 to 26, but once you start getting closer to 30, the numbers will drop off. We have 65, 70-year-old bronies, but there aren't very many of them in that. So that's why we said it that way. Okay, let's, did you want to do that one?
How do I stop worrying about people losing interest in the fandom that I like? People are always going to lose interest in this. They get older, they get more things in their lives, careers, marriage, family, things of that nature. And they're going to lose interest in this. And that's something you just need to face up to. But the main thing about it is that if you like it and it's something that gives you some pleasure and some fun and laughter and joy and, in this case, guidance, that's really what's the main thing that's important, is not the other people, it's you. Bonnet?
Oh, no, I think so.
Okay.
Next question.
All right, so I was wondering, in regards to your research, have you found any link between how long someone has been a fan and whether or not they have become more optimistic or pessimistic or nihilistic, either up or down, the longer they're a fan or not?
I don't think we have.
I don't think we have. I mean, what we've found is that the fandom has changed. If you look at people who have been, people who joined the first season versus the second versus the third versus, what we're finding is that the newer bronies tend to be more, and again, talking about our typology, they're more the social bronies, which tend to be more upbeat. They're often joining the fandom because they like the love and tolerance, they like the excitement, they like those. Some of the early season bronies are the ones that are a little more likely to leave the fandom, but then I think that tends to happen anytime, you know, you become part of a group and you like it, and then it changes. Sometimes it changes in ways that you're happy with. Sometimes, you know, it changes in ways in which you feel less comfortable, especially some of the early 4chan bronies. This is not the fandom that they were used to in the first couple years. So I don't know that we would say that people are becoming, I think the bronies coming in now are responding more to what you've built, this positive fandom in place.
Okay, the next one is, how did you each discover the fandom? This is easy for me because I'm going to ask Pat to first say how he discovered it, then Marcia, then I'll tell you, yes, where I fit in.
Well, and some of you, if you've heard us talk before, you're sort of, you've heard the name Will. And Will is my now 21-year-old son who's currently doing study abroad in Japan. But when Will was 16, he announced to me he was into something new. And I went, well, what are you into? And he said, I'm a brony. And I went, what? And then he described it, and I went, what? And then he said, go online and look. And I did, and I was just amazed at the artwork and the creativity. And that's when I then said to myself, to steal a line from Twilight Sparkle, we must science this immediately. And Will occasionally remind me, he'll say, Dad, now remember, I was the one who got you started in this. Usually he does that when he wants something, you know, but that's how I discovered the bronies, and that's what kind of launched this interest.
And Pat and I were teaching at a small liberal arts college. We were both teaching part-time, so they put our offices way down at the end of the hall. And he came to me one day and said, have you ever heard of bronies? And I, what? He said, bronies. And I think my response was, you've got to be kidding me. And so we talked about it, and Pat was interested in absorption and the factors of the film, of the films that were attracting this age group, because it is not, it is stereotypical on two dimensions, age and gender. And I had just left a psychology practice of over 30 years, and I was really more interested in personality and development. And so we took those two interests and put them together and did the first survey. And then
they came into my class and did the exposure study. And I heard about what a brony was, and my reaction was, oh man, is this cool? This sounds like so much fun. I want to get involved. And so after they did all the hard work, I came in and, yes, became involved and was sort of part of supporting them to make presentations at professional conferences. We've presented at the American Psychological Association and other professional conferences. So I'm more of the scientific, research-oriented brony researcher.
Let me mention Daniel Chadbourne. He's the fourth part of our group who's not here. Daniel contacted me after the first BronyCon in New York City, where I had presented and the information got out. And Daniel, who's a psychologist in Louisiana, was also a brony. And so we met up at the New Jersey BronyCon, and that's when he decided to join. And so he's been very helpful in designing surveys, but also he's been another source of student subjects. So he's got his subjects from Louisiana and that. So that's kind of, and I'm not sure exactly how Daniel discovered, but he was already a brony when he joined our team.
yeah, he emailed us, and after he had taken the first survey, and I picked up on it that, because I'm from Louisiana, that he was from Louisiana and he was teaching psychology, and I said, this looks good. So I emailed it on to Pat, and that was how he got involved.
Yeah, doesn't that go up any?
You would think. Close enough.
There we go. That's better, good.
All right, so this might be a little bit of a selfish question, but I'm a senior psychology student at Shepherd University in West Virginia. I'm working on my capstone project, which is going to be involved with handing surveys out to bronies. Basically, what I wanted to know is if you had any advice for working with the community since you've been doing it for a while, or anything like that.
Well, in general, and we kind of mentioned this a little earlier, and this is why we're so thankful to the fandom, is that we found that the bronies are very open to research. I think because they've seen, part of it, they've seen that in our research there can be some very positive outcomes. I mean, you can get information that helps reinforce what you're seeing, and it also gives you information that you can use. I've had people sort of say when the haters start saying hateful things, they'll say, wait a minute, these people have been studying us, here's what they say, how many bronies do you know? And it kind of shuts people up sometimes. So I think the fact that the brony fandom can be very open, but also you need to approach them with respect, tell them a little bit about why you're doing the research, let them see. I think one thing, sometimes people feel like they take our surveys and then you don't necessarily always hear a lot about what came from it. Partly it's because there's so much, I'm still analyzing data from the third survey because there's just so much information in it, and it takes quite a bit of time. So I guess I would say that. Be respectful, and your problem will be getting non-bronies. That's the biggest issue, trying to find people who aren't bronies. Of course, we have the benefit of we can offer our students extra credit.
And we have Daniel.
And we have Daniel. Yeah.
It's also an interesting cycle of events because I was a psychology major first, and then I became a brony, and now because of I'm just putting the two together. So it's not like I'm a third
There's a
party
lot of
person
psychology
in general,
in-
but yeah.
in-
There's
the brony
there's a tremendous amount of psychology in it.
Well, good luck with the project.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Email us if you have any questions.
Okay.
And email us a copy of the final product.
Here's an interesting question. And actually, it's interesting, somebody should ask this because we just sort of analyzed the data here recently. Do bronies tend to fall into a particular political ideology, such as conservative, liberal, libertarian, etc.? Interestingly, what we found is that the answer, and we had sort of two ways. One way is we asked bronies, if you were a liberal, conservative, libertarian. But we also had the bronies fill out a interesting survey called the Moral Foundation Survey. And it looks at what you base the idea of right and wrong on. In other words, when you sort of think something's right or something's wrong. And we got the bronies to fill that out, and then we compared the bronies to liberals and conservatives. And liberals and conservatives tend to look very different on the survey. And we also compared the bronies to moderates. Interestingly enough, the bronies didn't fit either group, any of the three. You kind of represent a group, which I think is positive, that makes use of all the moral foundations. In other words, you don't ask just, is it fair? You ask that, but you also ask, how's this going to impact on other people? You also ask, how's this fit with sort of tradition and that? So I guess the answer is, I thought the bronies would be a lot of liberals. The same way when it comes to religion, I thought the bronies would be a bunch of people without religion. In general, that's not true. That's not true. And that you really there are conservative bronies and liberal bronies, but as a group, you sort of are very unique. Again.
Well, and you are more conservative than the liberals, but more liberal than the conservatives. So you move to the middle, but your pattern is not moderate. You are much broader in the use of all four moral foundations, so you are unique. But it's interesting because you're near the middle, but you're not like moderates. Moderates use 1 or 2 foundations, and you as bronies use them all. We're very impressed.
Very unique.
Yes, it is.
But
So that's going to be an
it's a unique
exciting
group.
chapter.
Yeah.
We just presented it at a
Next.
conference.
Next.
All right. Well, I know I've spoken, especially with you, Dr. Edwards, at past cons and such. It's funny because I'm also a social scientist in training, I guess you can say. I'm about to graduate with my degree in sociology. And I actually spent the last semester doing a qualitative research project on a local area Brony group that I'm a part of. And they're pretty much all here staring at me right now. So, one thing that that I got out of my research, and it's on a much smaller scale, but a thing that struck me is it's a theory I'm working on, and it's essentially that it seems like the ideas behind love and tolerate and kind of just the ideology of what seems to make a brony is something that's been brewing already. And it's almost like the show came along in the right place at the right time type of thing. And it's like, it didn't have to be Pony that unified everybody, but it's like, so many people I talk to are basically say, like, these are my people, they think like me and such. So it's kind of like that catalyst. So I was kind of wondering what your opinions are, if you get a sense that maybe that's the type of thing, it's like people were waiting for this. It's like maybe not because of the show, but the show brought people together.
It's an interesting theory.
Yeah.
It certainly is an interesting theory, but I think that could be said about many things. You see certain churches pop up in different areas that are a little bit different from the others in that area, and and they get a good congregation going. It seems like people were waiting for something else. I think that, personal opinion, that generally this country is ripe for waiting for something else in leadership.
Yeah.
Take a look who's running. and both sides of the fence, folks. But I think that there's I think that this does occur, but it occurs in many spheres. It doesn't just occur with the bronies.
I also think it may be tied a little bit to the millennials. I think you as a generation. One thing we're finding, and some people would say the bronies, they're unchurched, and what we're finding is the bronies don't necessarily go to church less than others, but I think that this sort of need for guidance, that yours is a generation, every generation looks for answers and guidance. The Chinese also believe in synchronicity. Nothing just happens by chance. And so I tend to think the ponies came along at the time they needed to come along, and that it's a message that's reverberated with a lot of people.
I also think that with the issue of the guidance, that you have to take human development into consideration, and the age of the bronies is the age in which people begin questioning what they have been taught in the past. And they question this until they find a point where they are satisfied with the answers. Unfortunately, some people never reach that point. But I think that is also something which has helped the bronies to develop into a fandom.
Thank you. And
You're welcome.
I love your pictures from Japan, by the way.
Oh, what?
His pictures from Japan.
Oh,
that's
okay.
I have a lot of bronies who are my Facebook friends, which I have to tell you a quick little comment, how every so often Facebook will post over the last 6 months, your 4 most popular posts, people, and it did that to me about a month ago, and my 4 posts, 2 were kittens and 2 were ponies. And so I told a friend, you can't go wrong posting kittens or ponies.
You could post puppies.
Well, I don't want puppies maybe, but I have more of a kitten. here's a question that we chafe at a little bit. Not the question, but what the person's talking about. And we really hope that our book for social scientists may start to kind of open their eyes. But the question is, how should I deal with a professional counselor, doctor, psychiatrist that has put me into the autistic box after talking with them about being a brony? And here we're dealing with the stereotype some people have, that the bronies are a bunch of autistic, Asperger's individuals. And there are individuals in the bronies who carry those diagnoses. In fact, one of the nice things about the fandom is it is a safe place for people who carry these diagnoses. But to us, what's problematic about this is that pigeonholing. This is the stereotyping, and Marcia and I are clinical psychologists and therapists, and it really pisses me off when therapists do this. Because again, it comes back to this model that I mentioned earlier. You need to label things as deviant based upon, are they dysfunctional? So if I drink a beer a night, that's not a problem. If I drink a 12-pack a night, I'm in trouble. If you collect plushies, a few, that's okay. If you spend your paycheck and
Can't pay the rent?
Can't pay the rent because you're buying plushies, that's deviant. And so we're arguing in the book that we need to move to a model in which deviance is based upon, is the behavior functional? So liking ponies is not dysfunctional for most people. And so this is frustrating when we get therapists who pigeonhole.
Well, there's something else. You can go online to the characteristics of autism. They're online all over the place. And take a look at them and take an honest look at yourself. And if you sincerely do not feel that this applies to you, go find a new therapist. I mean, there is nothing wrong with changing therapist. If you do not fit with that therapist, I practiced for over 30 years, and I can tell you that there were some people that we just didn't gel. And there were some people, and thank gosh it was most people, that it was a good fit. But if it's not a good fit for you, go find somebody else. Because if it's not a good fit for you, you're going to get nothing out of it.
Also, you could send them to BronyStudy.com
Yeah.
and let them see what we've found. And if they're going to be good scientists, they'll look at the data and say, I need to reevaluate this.
And the other thing is that we have gotten emails from therapists that someone's come into their office and said, I'm a brony, and they've gone to look at BronyStudy.com and have emailed us and said, thank you for doing the research. Now I know how to deal with this issue.
Well, and I would like just to add, trust yourself and your interest in bronies, in the ponies and being a brony. If somebody labels you a certain way because of that, all those other things are true, but don't not become a brony because of that. Trust your interest. And you know what it's giving you, and that's an important part of you.
Okay, besides collecting all the accessories and whatnot, do you notice any major behavior differences between bronies and non-bronies?
Now, say it again.
Okay, besides all the plushie collecting and whatnot,
Oh, okay.
do you notice any differences in behavior between bronies and non-bronies?
The reason that
Yes and no.
yeah, I would say, and the reason I'm kind of hesitant, what you've asked is really a major part of the book. I'm finishing the one chapter in which I look at 60 different variables, personality variables, issues of spirituality, issues. And what we do find is there are significant differences between bronies and non-bronies on, for example, personality. Bronies do tend to be more introverted than the non-bronies. But when you go in and look at the brony typology, what you find is there's big differences. The hipsters and social bronies are very extroverted. The secret and the hidden bronies are very introverted. So there are differences between the non-bronies. In general, most of the differences, though, kind of speak to your uniqueness. And for example, the bronies, compared to non-bronies, you all have lower gender role stereotypes. In other words, you don't tend to view males and females in as traditional a way as non-bronies. And I think that's part of what makes it possible for you to look at the cartoon and say, cool, because you're not dealing with that. Although within the brony types, again, we see differences. So within the bronies, there's a lot of variation, but there are differences. So there are some, but it's hard to kind of narrow down. I guess this is where I get to put the little plug in. Read the book. You'll see.
Can't wait for the book.
Hopefully this time next year we'll be signing copies. Well, which I did answer a question somebody had about release date. We're hoping that our target is for next BronyCon to have that. So. Let's go to next question. I thought somebody might ask this because I mentioned in our exposure study where we took non-bronies and made them watch, I mentioned the Flim Flam episode.
Oh,
yeah.
So the question was, why did we choose that episode? And I know there, and you could get it, it's like arguing best pony, there is no right answer. It's like arguing which episode. The reason, and I chose that episode because of a couple characteristics. It had the music played a major role. You had they're singing, about the cider and the machine. You also had some prominent male ponies in, and if you remember a lot of the early episodes, it was, and I wanted an episode that would have clear, so there were male ponies and female, and music would play out. And then I also thought there was a real clear message, that went with it. So that's the reason we chose that episode. And I don't know if our results would have necessarily been different if we had chosen a different episode. We're going to do a new study in the fall, I might have mentioned, in which instead of having people watch a My Little Pony episode, we're going to present them with clips of actual bronies, kind of like you saw in the Brony Tale, to see whether, if we show them what bronies look like and let them hear what bronies, to see if that has more impact than actually making them watch an episode of the cartoon. So that'll be interesting to add that. It also just says, how do you approach new fandoms, and do you look at very old fandoms? So far, we haven't gotten into, we're looking at Disney princess fandoms, which is kind of old, but Disney princess fans, there's a new kind of, because of all the new princesses, there's a real revival. And so in some ways, that's kind of new. And we haven't chosen to look at sort of old, like Star Trek. They've been around forever. In fact, the Trekkies are fighting over, the new Star Trek versus the old Star Trek. And so it's a lot easier. In fact, again, we were so lucky with you all that we started studying the bronies when it wasn't even a year old. So our early data really fits the early fandom. And so it's a little easier to, League of Legends is fairly new, and so our studying that, we'll also be able to follow that a little bit.
Hi. I was wondering about your thoughts on the tendency for people to incorporate a fandom as a large part of their identity, and whether you had any thoughts about how that originated.
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question, please.
I was curious about your thoughts on people's tendency to incorporate a fandom as a large part of their identity, and whether you had any ideas on where that phenomenon arose.
To incorporate
fandom.
the
The fandom in
fandom
their identity.
into their identity.
Well, let me mention, when you kind of asked the question where that arose, I think that's a nature, and developmental research says, especially adolescent, early adults, the challenge we're faced with is figuring out who we are. I mean, we're all trying, And the challenge is, how do we put these different pieces together? We have our gender identity. Am I male? Am I female? A lot of times you throw in religious identity, you throw in political identity, you throw in
Social identity.
social, and so there's a lot of things we're juggling, and I think we're also looking for meaning. And sometimes we find meaning. I know some people it's all about sports, some people it's all about games, other people, and so
Other
I think
people, it's their profession.
yeah, the fact that people have found the bronies, to me, isn't a puzzle that they've looked for something. What's been surprising is that they found it in the bronies. In that, so I would say I'm not surprised that some people build their identity around the fandom, and that's again a normal part of. It's interesting, kind of related to this. We've asked the bronies about favorite pony. You know, who's your favorite pony? But the more important question psychologically is why. And about 75% of the bronies say, I chose my favorite pony because they're like me, which probably is why Fluttershy and Twilight Sparkle end up often being at the high on the list. But about 25% of the bronies choose the favorite pony because of who they'd like to be. And then what do you find? Rainbow Dash and Pinkie
Pinkie
Pie.
Pie.
Who wouldn't want to be the party pony, or who wouldn't want to have that much self-confidence, you know, and that. So that's also where some of the identity comes in, is we're sometimes we're choosing things that remind us of ourselves. Sometimes we're choosing things that are what we'd like to be. And that's all normal part of adolescent and young adult development. Thanks.
Okay. Do you think realistically that watching My Little Pony could become a treatment option? My husband's sitting over there waiting for this one. Yes, I do, and particularly for small children. I think it has a lot of lessons to teach on fairness, on resolving conflict, on anger, on the value of friendship. Yes, I do think it could become a treatment option. I would say that this would be something, if I were running a school, that I would definitely show to kindergarten through third grade. You know, that would be part of their, you know, rest time and things like that. Do I think it would be the only option or treatment by itself? No. I think that you would have to get in there with someone and discuss the episodes and why they are, what the meaning is behind the episodes, how problems were resolved. I don't think it could be by itself. Is there a correlation between typology to number of episodes the fan is behind on? We haven't looked at that. Nah.
The only thing I can think of is there is a relationship between our typology. The social bronies, in fact, in many fandoms, they'll talk about what you call your avid fans. Those are the social bronies. Probably a lot of you here are social bronies. They go to the events. They build their schedule around the new episodes. I see it on Facebook. You know, there's so much excitement when it's reported. There's a new episode Saturday. You know, and everybody gets built. So you will see that. Whereas there are some of the other types that don't seem to, like some of the hipsters. I'll get around to it. You know, so that there's some difference that way.
Do bronies on average have more or less social awareness than other groups? I would say it's probably about the same.
And it differs according to the typology.
Yeah. I would say it's about the same. I see the object of interest of this fandom to be very different. I really don't see this fandom to be very different. You know, that the group is all that very different from a lot of other fandoms or a lot of other groups.
Okay, so this is a little bit awkward since you just answered my question, but
That's okay, we're used to that.
I just wanted to ask if you could elaborate on the effect size of being able to treat someone with I suppose, ponies. I know that you probably don't have enough data to actually do a real comparison, but in comparison to things like CBT, SSRIs, SNRIs, bupropion, have you actually looked into what kind of effect size you'd be looking at for treatment with ponies?
We haven't looked at effect size at all. One of the things that when we did the Fandom Change My Life survey, we asked the Bronies to email their stories about how the fandom changed their lives. There were a lot of Bronies with Asperger's and other anxiety disorders also. And one of the things that they consistently said was that it helped them to recognize their need for other people in their lives and help them to deal more effectively with social relationships. Now, have we studied effect size? We don't have the group for that.
And in general, we've looked at how it's changed their lives, but not in a deeply therapy way, that. Although we have, my wife was sitting in an airport and a woman sat next to her and they started chatting, and somehow or another the issue came up of bronies, and the woman ends up sort of smiling and said she worked at a facility up in Connecticut that dealt with emotionally disturbed teenagers. And she said they actually did in-services on how to use My Little Pony to work with their populations. So I thought so I know there are groups out there making use of this, but our scope has been to look at the fandom in a kind of a more general, larger way. So, thank you.
Who's next? Jane?
Have any of you seen the Moment with Dr. Wolf videos?
I'm not sure what.
A Moment with Dr. Wolf.
I'm not. That's a video?
He's a fandom proclaimed sort of Brony psychologist.
Oh.
Does he have a degree?
Oh.
Well, we're not going to fool with that. Forget that.
Yeah. He's an accountant. Yeah. Well, I guess I don't want us to seem like we're because in other words,
snobs.
this is a fandom that's open and that, and I think we have to be welcoming to people bringing their interest in, and I think people, and I've seen bronies kind of get into doing analysis of the fandom, and a lot of times I find that insightful and interesting. But I'm also always a little cautious. Everybody has an opinion. In fact, this is part of what we ran into. Everybody had an opinion about the bronies, but nobody had the data. Nobody had the thousands of bronies and non-bronies. So that's part of what we went in to sort of do.
Yeah.
I would always sort of say, and Marcia sort of said, well, what's his degree? You always need to ask that, because sometimes people will act like they're sure and they know everything. Well, they got a strong opinion, but is it scientific?
And
what is it based on?
Yeah, and do they have a broad base of knowledge to back it up?
Yeah. I will mention one thing, and this often comes up when, and having been in psychology for over 30 years and taught for 30 years, you will run into people who take a more psychodynamic view, and so I'll get into people who will be using Freud to analyze this or that, and I know Marcia's raising her hand, but by and large, Freudian theory does not fit a research focus. There is not the data to back it up.
No.
So there are other psychological theories that we tend to use. Cognitive, behavioral, social theory.
Although I will tell you that when I went to, I moved from Louisiana to South Carolina and went to get my license in South Carolina. and had to go through an interview, and the person that was interviewing me said, well, what is your main theory, basis in theoretical background? And I said, well, I'm an unapologetic Freudian. And she threw her hands up and she said, oh, my kids wrote the book. But, you know, that is one of the weaknesses of Freud's theories, is that they're totally untestable.
Okay. So within the field, there's a lot of discussion about that. I love Jungian typologies. They're fun to talk about, but there's no
data.
No data to support them.
I'm just curious if in your research you have encountered any other media that is comparable to My Little Pony in which the intended audience and the fandom that sprung up have such a wide discrepancy.
No.
No,
Yeah,
it's
we
totally
haven't.
unique.
We've
Not
looked.
that we haven't, although I do have to admit, and this is where I look to millennials like yourself and my son, because we're very focused on the bronies, but I'm not out there trying to look at every anime show there is and so if people know of other fandoms that have had the similar experience, by all means, we'd love to sort of hear about it. But I think that's, again, what I feel is sort of unique about this fandom is, and in fact, for I think several years, Hasbro was beside them. They didn't know what to think of this. They kept saying, what's
Nor did they know what to do with it.
Yeah. So I think it's, again, it points to that uniqueness. Hopefully, maybe there will be, maybe some other producers will look at this and say, we need to try to replicate this. So maybe we'll see other shows that cross stereotypes, that have messages that are similar. I hope so. Thank you. We had interest, and I think this came up because in our earlier discussion, I mentioned the issue of deviance, and we're arguing for what we call a functional model of deviance, which means you ask, what's the function of the behavior? If somebody's doing something and it makes them happy, and there's no downside, they're not losing their job, then we're going to say that's not deviant. So they ask, what is the academic definition of deviance? And using our model, deviance is when something doesn't work for you. If it's creating problems. So in other words, buying plushies, no problem. If you don't have money for rent because you're buying too many plushies, then that sort of becomes an issue. So we take a more functional, whereas a lot of people, again, will look at the behavior and say, ooh, that's too strange, and so they'll call it deviant. And we're hoping to nudge the social psychologist, or the social scientist, excuse me. Jan looks at me. The social scientists away from that and more towards a functional model.
I'm a parent of a Brony, and he's also special needs. He was born with special needs. And I did the same thing you did when he came to me. He was a little bit younger. He was probably 14 and a half. Mm-hmm. And first thing I did was research it, and, you know, so I could support him, you know, because all my friends were saying terrible things, and, you know, people didn't understand. But I did, some of the research I did had said, you know, a lot of it, there has tended to be a lot of special needs people that are in the Bronies. Mm-hmm. With your research, did you find that as well? And I know you touched on it earlier a little bit.
Well, when we did what we call the Fandom Changed My Life survey, which we asked Bronies to kind of tell us what it was like before they became a Brony and after, and we found about a third of that group, and there were, I think, about 2,000 Bronies that did that survey. About a third of them reported that they had received a diagnosis in the past. The most common diagnoses were depression, anxiety, attention deficit, and Asperger's. And so about 15% of that third had said, Asperger's, which is one of the autism spectrum disorders. So these disorders are there, but again, they're not a prominent part. But I think, again, the cartoon, the supportiveness of the fandom makes it a wonderful place. if I was doing therapy right now, I'm not practicing right now, I could see sending some of my clients, especially those that may be struggling with social anxiety and making friends, I'd suggest that they go check out the Bronies, because
Parents need to be supportive, definitely.
Well,
So-
I definitely agree with you that, parents need to look into anything that their kids get into. Parents need to look into it, and if, it looks like something that's reasonably healthy, then support the child.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, that's what I tell my friends. I said, well, he's not into drugs, he's not into, running around doing bad things. The worst thing he does is collect ponies, That's
Yeah, how bad can it be?
right.
Yeah, my ex-wife, when my son he told her he was a Brony too, and she called me and she was like, he's a Brony, and I'm like, Joyce,
Fool it, Joyce.
go look at the website. So she called me back a couple hours later. I'm glad he's a Brony. So, it's like.
Well, and I think the other thing, it's not just the fandom, but you look at what is the message? What is the message of the cartoon? It's about friendship and how people struggle in friendships and how they communicate with each other and how they solve problems. I mean, what a wonderful thing for people to look at and figure out, gee, that's how they did it, and that's not so different from me, and I've experienced that, and maybe this will work, and to get ideas. I mean, it's a very rich environment for interactions.
And I wonder if the characters, instead of being cute little pastel ponies, look more like The Simpsons, if there would be such a furor over it. I just wonder if people wouldn't be more accepting of it.
I think the fact that you like a cartoon of pastel ponies is a double-edged sword. In one way, it feeds into stereotypes, and some people are going to go, oh, there's got to be something wrong with that. On the other side, it breaks stereotypes. So which I think people need to see. The stereotypes are just constructs that we sort of agree on, but sometimes they're false. Sometimes they're dysfunctional. They hurt people and that. So, go ahead.
Let me adjust this really quick. It's a little
No, that's.
Oh, you figured it out. All right.
stuff sometimes.
There we go.
Okay. Still a little low, but that's okay. So I'm friends with a lot of Bronies. I really recently became a Brony.
Welcome to the group.
But I have friends who've been Bronies for years, and I've known about it for years, and I've just been like, I'm going to avoid this for as long as I can. And So a lot of my friends have had horrible experiences with telling their parents and telling their friends that they're Bronies. And one of them, he told his dad saw a MLP background on his computer. He took his computer outside and shot it with a shotgun.
Oh boy.
And
That's low. Well, wait a minute. Who's got the problem here?
But yeah, another one of my friend has had serious. It's been years since then, but he had some serious backlash with a lot of his friends. So he became obsessed with the notion of normal because of that, because so many people hated him for it. And so I've been wondering why people have such a negative reaction. I mean, I understand if you find it weird and don't like it, but what's with such a negative backlash? I don't understand that.
I think part of the reason is it threatens people. It threatens a very traditional view of what men and women are like and what they should be like, what's a man, what are masculine characteristics. And people who have that kind of view they have a narrow viewpoint of the world. And when there's things that are different from that, that's extremely hard. And it's very threatening to what they see is the way things should be. And many people who fit into that stereotype have even had trouble with women gaining the rights that they have. And, we've moved a long way. People now don't have as much problems with that, although the people who keep these stereotypes think, women should stay home, they should not work, And so when they see the same kind of equality sort of going for men, that they like something that we may have stereotyped as being more feminine, that's very threatening, and it creates a real problem. And part of it is, this is what women went through when they wanted to be somewhat equal to men and to show that it's okay to have masculine characteristics. People reacted very negatively. I mean, Marcia and I lived through it, and people reacted negatively to doing things that were different that women didn't typically do. I had people react very negatively to me that I was a professor and I was going to teach at a university. I mean, they felt that that was only something men did, especially in psychology, and I'm a statistical person. So that especially was just for men. And I think part of what's going on is that breaking of the stereotype and liking something different is going to be tough. And this is something that bronies are doing as sort of an edge of a sword that's moving in to kind of break that stereotype.
You know, I don't think that people in the millennial generation really do appreciate what Jan and I went through. When I decided I was going to graduate school and asked one of my professors to write me a letter of recommendation, he said, I have no doubt that you would be a good psychologist, but all you're going to do is get that degree and then stay home and bake chocolate chip cookies. Well, I had a private practice for over 30 years and retired from it about 8 years ago. So I've often wanted to send him a box of Chips Ahoy and tell him, didn't have time to bake, sorry about that.
And I mean, I've been a psychologist for 40 years. And my husband and I have 5 kids, and we managed it all. And I remember the letter of recommendation for the job that I have currently was, you know, she's a very nice gal. We don't expect her to do any research, but, you know, she's nice and she's cute and, you know, I mean, it was extremely demeaning. And if you need somebody like that for your little university, then I think she'll fit in.
And I would add one other thing. There's a theory in developmental psychology that looks at, you know, we all create a worldview, and we all have a view of the world, and we like it to make sense, and we don't like it to change. Anytime we're confronted with a new experience, we meet somebody new, or we hear some new information. As teachers, this happens all the time. I tell my students something new, and I can see by their faces, they've never heard this before. What do you do with it? You can do one of two things. You can either force it to fit what you already believe, and that, which means then you distort it, or you change what you believe. You change your worldview. You change your worldview. A lot of people, when they hear their son, daughter say, "I'm a brony," that's new information. And if they have a worldview that does not fit, they're going to resist changing, which is why sometimes families will turn on an individual. You know, they'll say, "I didn't realize you had a problem," or they'll blame someone else. "You're the one who did this to him." Because they don't want to do the work of making sense of a world that's bigger and different. They don't want to. We always tell our students, you know, the challenge is not to force new information into the way we view things, but to expand. You know, in the Bronies, you all have helped us expand our view of what is normal, what is healthy, you know, what is functional, and I think some people pick this up when they talk about the Bronies sort of leading or being the cutting edge of a new definition of masculinity. It's because the Bronies are causing a lot of people to sort of have to look at it and say, I need to change the way I view things. But people don't want to do that generally.
Well, and just sort of a final thing, I mean, to you it's probably a really odd thing, but I was terrified to tell my parents I wanted to go to graduate school. I was a math computer science major. I finished in 3 years, and then I found psychology. I found out I loved it. And I didn't really even know what graduate school was, and I found out, oh gosh, I can study more of this this thing I love, this is great. My parents were so upset. They were just so disappointed that I wasn't an elementary school teacher or a secretary, and I
Or a
wasn't going to.
nurse.
Well, for them it was elementary school teacher or secretary, and that I wasn't going to stay home and have children. And it turned out I had lots of children, clearly, 4 of my own and a stepson, but they were, and I felt really bad. My mom died when I was very young, and she never found out that, I could do both. And just because it didn't fit into their worldview, that maybe I was happy and that was okay. And my kids turned out great. I have 2 that are medical doctors. I have 1 that has his PhD in chemistry. He's at MIT, and I have the last one of mine is going back to get a 2nd degree in chemical engineering. They turned out okay, even though, I broke the stereotypes back then,
And that I've my family in Italy, they're all be a medical doctor or get out. So.
Expectations.
Yeah.
Let's take a couple more questions here real quick, because I know we only have a few more minutes. So
5 more minutes, okay, thank you.
Have you noticed with bronies, do they seem to have different objectives than most other people?
No.
No?
I would say in general not. That's where the fan function research shows that even though, and this is the thing, what you like is different from other groups, but what you get out of being a fan is very similar to people who like NASCAR, or people who like Harry Potter, or people who, and I saw some people react to the NASCAR statement. I don't care for NASCAR myself, but it's,
We're from the South.
so
And we still
there
don't
may be
have
difference
NASCAR.
in what you like, but why and the thing you get out of it. The bronies really aren't that different, Thank you.
Hello, I have 2 questions, and I got here late, so I'm sorry if I ask one you've already answered. But the first one is, you talk a lot about adolescence and a sense of self, and I was just curious where you think the appeal comes in for older or elderly fans of the show who have already lived a long life or have a well-established sense of self already. And the second question I had was, how do you think that the community, the Brony community, could either hinders or aids in the appeal of the show to new viewers? And if it does hinder it, how could we better that as a community?
I think, and as someone, even though I sort of tell people I'm not a brony, I'm a brony booster, but I very much enjoy the show, and I realize that part of it is, and I'm certainly an older generation, is I'm pleasantly surprised that this is around. I mean, we didn't have shows like this. And so what I'm saying is, if you have somebody whose personality is open to new experiences, likes messages that are positive and upbeat, likes to see people grow and that, then no matter what age you are, I think you're going to be attracted to the My Little Pony. So, I mean, I think that that's part of it. Their personality simply sort of fits with it. The issue about what the fans can do, we'll touch on that a little bit, and this, it's good that you're excited, it's good you want people to know about the fandom. Sometimes if you're too exuberant, that can scare people away. Also, though, realize even within you all, the reason you're here differs. Not everybody likes the ponies for the same reason. And so one thing to realize is you might tell them in all your excitement about why you like it. You might say, watch it, watch it, watch it. It may not fit for them. It may not, but they might get hooked on something. They might hear the music and really get caught up in that, or see the fan art and get caught up in that. So share your interest, but don't push it. That's one thing that I would say. And be careful with the Rule 34 stuff. Again, it's out there. We know it. We're going to talk about it in the book a little bit. And it has a place, but also realize it scares some people. It fits the stereotype that you're a bunch of deviants, which you're not, but that. Okay, maybe I guess we maybe have one more question, and then okay.
The chubby middle-aged mayor. The joke didn't go through. Crap! But when we have ridiculous comments like that in the fandom, are any other questions which delve deeper into the show, is it at all some kind of attempt to go separate further from reality in a fraction of cases?
I'm not sure. Actually, what I'm going to say, talk with me here after we're done. I need to hear a little bit more of your question because I'm not sure that I fully understand. And I know we're running out of time, so I mean to rush it. So, yeah. Okay, hang around for a minute, and I want to hear.
There was
a
an
little bit more of the
attempt.
question. Okay, thanks. All right, thank you all, and I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody. If you see us around, we're always interested in answering your questions, and we'll hopefully see you next year, and we'll have the book.